The air in the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The only sounds were the methodical ticking of a vintage wall clock and the soft shuffling of legal documents. Beams of sunlight pierced the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that hung in the air like unspoken ideas. All attention was riveted on the tiny form occupying the witness stand. She was Meera, a girl of 9 years. Her feet hovered high above the floor, unable to touch the wooden platform below. She clutched a well-worn, cloth-bound storybook, its cover tattered from countless moments of quiet solace. Meera's attire was simple, a soft pink dress adorned with tiny embroidered stars, the kind of garment chosen for courage when one felt none. This was no school performance. It was not a nightmare. This was the reality of family court in a sleepy Oregon town, where Meera was the sole child amidst a room of legal professionals, a judge, and her 2 parents. Her parents were positioned on opposing sides of the aisle, each burdened by blame, apprehension, and shattered trust. Her mother, next to her attorney, gripped a tissue, her face exhausted yet resolute. Her father remained stiff, his arms crossed tightly, his gaze vacant but with a visible tremor. An undercurrent of tension vibrated in the quiet, like an electrical current, but Meera's focus was not on them. Her gaze was fixed upon the aisle just past the wooden barrier, on a large German shepherd named Axel. He wore a dark green vest with the words "Service Dog" and "Do Not Pet" embroidered in white. He was seated with patience and stillness, yet possessed an alertness suggesting he anticipated something invisible to everyone else. The events that were about to unfold would alter the course of everything. Meera had not uttered a sound for more than 18 months. Her silence had not been sudden. It had crept in gradually, until the faintest noises she once made, humming, laughing, requesting bedtime tales, vanished like chalk drawings in the rain. It wasn't that she had nothing to communicate. It was because communication had previously resulted in something dreadful. No one present in that courtroom was aware of the complete story. Not the lawyers, not the bailiff, and perhaps not even the judge. But Meera's mother knew. And somewhere in his depths, despite his impassive face, her father knew as well. It had taken place on a frigid winter evening. Meera's father had been storming through the house, his rage simmering just below the surface. A single incorrect word, one misplaced glance, and the situation detonated. She had attempted to flee, to conceal herself, but he had seized her. He shook her violently, with enough force to leave marks. With enough force for her world to go dim. The bruises healed with time, but something more profound had shattered. Her voice, her sense of security, her conviction that the world was a trustworthy place, all gone in an instant. In the subsequent days, she did not weep. She did not yell. She withdrew into herself, as if becoming invisible was the only path to safety. Her spirit had not merely faded, it had splintered. She ceased to reach for embraces. She ceased to ask for stories. It was as though a vibrant piece of her had disappeared, and no one knew how to bring it back. Therapists attempted months of sessions, using crayons to draw circles, playing with dolls, and even prescribing medications. None of it was effective. Meera kept her lips firmly sealed and her gaze lowered. This was not an act of defiance. It was fear, pure, conditioned fear. Then Axel entered her life, not as a solution, but as a lifeline. During their first encounter, Meera sat with her legs crossed on the therapist's office floor, barely moving her eyelids. Axel lay quietly on the other side of the room, studying her with his deep, knowing eyes. He made no move toward her. He did not plead for attention, yet an understanding passed between them. In that quietude, Axel appeared to comprehend, without command or instruction, that this small girl was the one he was meant to shield, the one who needed a reminder of her own significance. He was introduced with care as a component of a trauma recovery program. Initially, Meera would not even make contact with him. But Axel was patient, calm, and gentle. He never barked or acted hastily. He simply lay close by, his breathing even, matching her rhythm. It was weeks before she laid a hand on his fur, and months before she made her first gesture. Gradually, Meera started to communicate not with humans, but through Axel, using a gentle touch, a particular motion, or a nod they had rehearsed in therapy. He was more than a comfort animal. In the view of her psychologist, Axel had evolved into something far more significant. a conduit to the world she had lost faith in. And at that moment, this conduit stood tall and silent, mere feet from where Meera sat, waiting for her to make her way across. Judge Penelope Ward was not known for her flexibility. She had presided over the bench for more than 25 years, navigating civil litigations, custody disputes, and more fractured families than she could recall. Her professional image was precise and clinical. She adhered strictly to the law, giving no quarter to emotion, drama, or sentimentality. Many held her in high esteem, some found her intimidating, but she was never underestimated. That morning, she sat upright in her chair, a pair of silver spectacles resting on the bridge of her nose, her robe impeccably ironed, her hair styled in a severe bun. The sort of judge who prompted even veteran attorneys to improve their posture. Yet, there was something different about today. She observed Meera, truly observed her. There was no judicial procedure in that look, no detached legal analysis. Just a silent study of the way the girl held her book, the rigidity in her shoulders, and the fact that her feet did not make contact with the floor. Then she noticed the slightest movement, a flicker of Meera's gaze toward the back of the courtroom, toward the dog. Judge Ward glanced at the German shepherd sitting placidly behind the wooden partition. She had granted the motion to permit the service animal after reviewing the psychologist's written testimony, but she had not anticipated this sight. A girl held together by silence, and a dog creating a space for her to be something more. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Meera," she said, her tone softer than anyone in the room had ever heard. "I need to ask you something. You are not required to answer with words. If you aren't ready, you may nod or shake your head, or look at Axel. I will understand." Meera did not reply immediately. The silence extended until it felt oppressive. No one dared to make a sound. Not the lawyers, not the clerk. Even the court stenographer had stopped, his fingers poised above the keys, as if a single tap might break the spell. Meera was perfectly still, with the exception of her hands. Her left hand remained wrapped around the tattered spine of her storybook, but slowly, with great care, her right hand started to lift. It did not rise high, just enough for the keenest observers to see. She traced a small, deliberate circle in the air with her little finger, a gesture so faint it was like a whisper only one creature in the room could perceive. Axel understood. The German shepherd's ears perked up, and he rose to his feet in a single, smooth movement. Not hurried, not hesitant. His actions were exact, well rehearsed. He walked, or rather strode, through the small gate next to the witness stand. The bailiff shifted instinctively, but the judge held up a hand to halt him. All eyes watched as Axel came to Meera, turned, and sat by her side, facing the courtroom as if he were assuming a guard post. He was composed, silent, and unwavering. Meera then tapped her own chest. Once, and then again. Axel barked. A single, sharp bark. It was short, but distinct. And that was all. A shockwave passed through the room like a cold draft. People glanced at each other, perplexed but also touched. The lawyers conferred in hushed tones. The court clerk blinked in rapid succession. Meera's mother pressed both hands to her mouth. Judge Ward sat erect, her hands folded, her face impassive. But her eyes scanned the girl's face as if deciphering a message penned in invisible ink. "What does that signify?" she inquired without breaking her gaze. Her voice low but clear. From the rear of the courtroom, a figure rose. It was Meera's psychologist. Her face was ashen, her hands shaking slightly. "That is a communication sequence we formulated," she explained, her voice carrying in the stillness. "Meera and Axel have practiced it for months. It's the way she conveys the truth when she is too frightened to speak it aloud." The judge paused for a moment. She blinked once, slowly. Her attention moved from the psychologist to Meera, and then to Axel, who remained seated like a soldier on duty. The room held its breath. The psychologist stepped forward, holding a small cream-colored envelope, slightly creased at the corners. "She gave this to me yesterday," she said softly. "She instructed me to give it to the judge only if Axel barked." Judge Ward accepted the envelope, her fingers firm, though her eyes betrayed a hint of uncertainty. She opened it with care, pulling back the flap as if it held something sacred. In a sense, it did. Inside was a drawing, rendered in crayon but precise in its depiction of pain. It portrayed a small girl, clearly Meera, huddled in a corner, her arms wrapped protectively over her head. Towering above her was a man, tall, with a red, contorted face of rage, his hands balled into fists, his mouth open in a soundless yell. In a corner of the drawing stood Axel, positioned between the man and the girl. His body was low and defensive, his mouth open mid-bark, his eyes sharp and protective. The courtroom was quiet, but an invisible change had occurred. Judge Ward gazed at the drawing for longer than seemed necessary. Her lips tightened into a thin line, and her throat worked as she swallowed, battling the emotion welling in her eyes. She had presided over hundreds of cases, but none had ever confronted her so directly, through a child's truth articulated in broken lines and vivid crayon. She flipped the drawing over. On the reverse, inscribed in uneven block letters with a blue marker, were 9 simple words. He says he cares, but I only feel safe when he's not there. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. The father shot to his feet, sending his chair clattering backward. This is preposterous. That dog is trained. She could have. Sit down, Judge Ward commanded. Her voice was no longer gentle. It sliced through the silence like a bolt of lightning. Or I will have you removed. The father froze. Axel did not stir. Meera did not recoil. For a long moment, no one moved. Judge Ward set the drawing down on the bench with deliberate care, as though a mere gust of wind might damage it. Her fingers traced the paper's edges as if it were a living, fragile thing. Her gaze flicked to Meera, then back to the words written in unsteady letters. He says he cares, but I only feel safe when he's not there. It was not evidence in a conventional sense, but it was something more profound. It was a child's unvarnished truth, not filtered through adult reasoning or legal debate. And in that formal, rule-bound courtroom, that truth landed with more force than any written report. The father stayed standing, his face red with fury, his chest rising and falling rapidly. She's manipulating you, he barked, gesturing toward Meera. She's using that dog. This whole thing is coached. Judge Ward remained unfazed. This court, she stated icily, does not respond well to intimidation. You can either be seated or be escorted out. His mouth opened to object, but the bailiff took a single step in his direction. The father sat. The silence resumed. Axel stayed perfectly still, his gaze fixed forward, his body now leaning just perceptibly into Meera's leg. It was a quiet reassurance. I am here. And Meera, she had not moved, not even winced during her father's tirade. But something had shifted. Her shoulders, previously curved inward, seemed to straighten just a fraction, as if a great weight had been lifted. And then, in the softest voice the room had ever heard, Meera spoke. Axel knows who keeps me safe, she said. He remembers everything, even when I couldn't. The words did not reverberate. They didn't have to. Their significance permeated every corner of the room. Even the court reporter had ceased to type. For a long moment, the room was suspended between a held breath and disbelief. The sound of Meera's voice, quiet as it was, landed like a clap of thunder, not due to its volume, but to its very existence. After 18 months of quiet, the courtroom had borne witness to a miracle, a subdued but seismic one. Judge Ward made no attempt to conceal her reaction. She blinked several times, as if to confirm she had heard correctly. She leaned forward, placing both elbows on the bench, her fingers interlaced. Her stern demeanor had not disappeared, but something new had emerged beneath it: reverence. Meera, she said softly. Thank you. Those 2 words hung in the air like a benediction. Axel remained at Meera's side, motionless, but his ears flickered at the sound of her voice, and he pressed a little closer, his side brushing against her arm. It was a minor gesture, but it anchored her. Meera's gaze never drifted to her father, not even once. She did not flinch upon hearing his sharp intake of breath, or when his hands clenched into fists on the table. Her eyes stayed forward, her concentration absolute. She had spoken her truth. Judge Ward shifted her focus to Meera's mother, whose tears were now flowing unrestrained. Her lawyer placed a comforting hand on her back, but the woman was barely aware. Her entire being was concentrated on her daughter with a mixture of awe, sorrow, pride, and heartbreak. Because in her daughter's voice, she could sense the burden of every sleepless night, every hidden bruise, every scream that had been silenced. It was the sound of a pain no mother ever wishes to hear, expressed not in loudness but in honesty. "Ma'am," Judge Ward said, her voice unwavering, "I am granting you full custody of your child." The courtroom did not erupt. There was no applause, only a silent, shared release, as if the building itself had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. The father opened his mouth to speak again, but this time the bailiff moved forward and shook his head. No words were necessary. The judge's gavel lay untouched. It was not finished. Not quite. The legal documents were in order. The testimony had been given, though few words had been uttered. The evidence was a crayon drawing on the judge's bench. And yet, the most lasting impression was not what had been displayed or spoken, but what had been felt. Judge Ward began to gather her files with a practiced efficiency, arranging them in a neat pile before her. The room had quieted, though a sense of normalcy had not returned. Something profound had passed through the space, something almost sacred, and no one was eager to disrupt it. Her hand hovered over the gavel, ready to conclude the proceedings. But she stopped. Her gaze shifted from the mother, who was weeping quietly with gratitude, to the father, seated stiffly in defeat. Then to Meera, still on the witness stand with Axel faithfully beside her, the book on her lap, now slightly ajar. The judge looked straight at the child, and for a fleeting moment in her extensive career, her voice trembled. "You've conveyed more with a single signal than most adults do with 1,000 words," she murmured. She was no longer speaking as a judge, but as a person who had just witnessed something that had broken through every defense of legal training, procedure, and self-control. Judge Ward lowered her hand, and rather than striking the gavel with authority, she placed it gently on the bench, not with a sense of judgment, but of wonder. Then, without another word, she rose and exited the courtroom. And the room remained silent, for there was nothing left to be said. 6 months later, in a different kind of quiet, one filled with tranquility, the sun felt warm on a park bench. Leaves drifted down in the gentle wind, their moving shadows dancing on the pages of a notebook open on Meera's lap. Her small fingers held a colored pencil, meticulously sketching a picture of trees, birds, and a very familiar-looking dog. Axel was curled up next to her, his eyes half shut, but his ears as sharp as ever. He no longer needed to watch her every second. She wasn't shattered anymore, just mending, slowly and surely. Meera still wasn't very talkative, but it wasn't necessary. She laughed, she drew, she met people's eyes. She had started sleeping through the night. Her therapist called it progress. Her mother called it a miracle. A little boy ambled over from the playground, his hands coated with melting ice cream. He stopped a few feet away and gestured toward Axel. "Can I pet your dog?" he inquired. Meera looked up, a small smile forming on her lips. She didn't reply at once. For a brief moment, her fingers faltered with indecision, a remnant of the girl who once vanished into silence. But then she put her pencil down, shut her notebook, and tapped her chest gently. Axel let out a single, friendly bark and wagged his tail. The boy giggled, and then Meera laughed too. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that bubbled up in her chest and poured out like sunlight. It wasn't just a sound, it was life. The kind of laugh that announced to the world that she was still present, that the bridge was holding, and that the healing had truly started.